Oh, excuse me. Sure. I'm going to be early tonight.
Well, thank you for telling our audience. Welcome, everybody. You've just heard the latest news that Wendy will be going to bed early tonight.
I yawned. Sorry. I'm so used to Zoom, I'm expecting to see people on the other side.
So thankfully, the Board of Administration did finish their meeting early, so we are on time. Oh, do excuse me, there's buttons popping up on this computer. So we'll just wait a few minutes and hopefully all of the participants will join us today. It's great to be back after having a long break after conference last year and then Christmas. So yeah, we're geared up for this one, aren't we?
We are. We're definitely geared up for this one, and we're impressed by the number of people that have registered today too. So it's just very, very good. So thank you for joining us. I know we are waiting for a few actually.
Yeah. So I think you do have your eager beavers that register and then unable to make it on the day.
Yeah.
So we'll just wait for the numbers to stabilise for people joining us, and then we'll make a start. So Margaret, you've just asked a question whether we can see you or not. We cannot. So with a webinar, we're the ones doing the talking. If anybody has any questions, down the bottom of your Zoom screen is a Q&A button. So just pop your questions through there. Feel free to use the chat in the background. Hopefully that's operational. I haven't turned it off. If you just want to chatter among yourselves about things that we're saying as well. Otherwise, put your questions through the Q&A feature. I'll just set up our sharing screen and then we'll make a start. I push all the right buttons again, I'm out of practice.
Okay, very good.
All right then. So welcome to our first MCNZ webinar for this year. This webinar, if you weren't expecting anything else, is about meeting our requirements. If this is not what you're expecting, you're welcome to stay and listen to us as well. We are recording this webinar and the information will be made available on the website once we've tacked all the relevant information together, and I'll email out when that's available on site. Do post your questions as you think of them. There's no need to wait until the end, and we'll try and answer those as we go. Of course, if we're going to answer them later in our talk, we'll just let them ride for a while. So reintroductions, in case you've missed us since we've been away. Wendy.
So I'm Wendy Anderson, insurance and property. I look after the insurance and property for the church. And I've got a background in insurance and property and also investigative work. I was in the New Zealand Police for 10 years.
And I'm Trudy, I'm the Health, Safety and Risk Advisor for the church. My background on this particular topic that's relevant is I used to administer one of the Transit New Zealand, the state highway regional offices, and there was quite a lot of audit work around that, particularly at the time that I joined. My predecessor had been ill for a while, and there was a lot of backtracking to do to say, are we actually complying with the requirements that have been put upon us? So give me a spreadsheet and I'm as happy as Larry. Wendy, would you like to take control?
Yes. So I want to talk to you today about the process for approvals for building projects in the sale and purchase of property, or anything relating to lease property, such as lease agreements as well. So the building stages where MC, the Methodist Connectional Property Committee, would want to be involved and approve that that step so that you can move on to the next step. There's 4, and if we look at those and as concept, consent, tender, awards, contract, and commence, those are the 4 stages that they're involved in. So and MCPC approval is required for all property work, construction work, the sale and purchase of property, but construction work or projects over $50,000 plus GST, or requiring a resource or building consent. So the concept approval is a really good time to use the MCPC experts. On MCPC is an architect, a quantity surveyor, and also an engineer, a structural engineer. Actually, was a lecturer at the university in the engineering department, and he's very good as well. In fact, those 3 are very good. We also have an accountant on MCPC and some other members of Pacifica and Te Māori, and also an ex-general secretary who knows all of the church processes. So she's extremely helpful for the MCPC to make decisions. So at that concept stage, it's really a good time to involve MCPC, because they will be able to give you some ideas that you may not have thought of. And an example might be that you're building a parsonage, and the toilet, that the presbyter's office is first room in off the front door, but the toilet is through the living area, and they would want you to think about having a toilet that's close to the minister's office for visitors that arrive, and so that they are not walking through the family area to use the toilet if that was necessary. So yes, we have the concept. That's the concept approval part at the start, and MCPC would then want to see if they would approve the concept plans and for you to proceed to working drawings, so that you can to lodge the building consent. They will approve those working drawings, and then you will be able to invite tenders, and once you have the tenders, you would then award the contract and you can commence work.
So this is a requirement, and it's all laid out in the bricks and mortar book, yes, isn't it?
That's right, it is. And it's church law. It's not the collectional office sort of coming down hard and sort of making things difficult or drawn out or anything like that. It's actually what's been approved at conference, years ago. So it's just part of what we all have to abide by, actually, not just parishes, and it's just church requirements. One of the things that MCPC also approves is the buying and selling of church properties, and some of the things that you require before you for an application to come to MCPC. Or one of the most important things is the market valuation. So the market valuation is not is just there. That's by a registered valuer, or carried out by a registered valuer, not a real estate appraisal. That's not sufficient, and MCPC will base their approval on the estimated value of the property that's in that market valuation on the executive page. So a valuer will justify how they've come up with the value of the property. It's based on the sale of properties, similar properties in the area, and also their knowledge of the market as well. If you're purchasing a property, you will be required to provide a builder's report and also a land story. Now, land story is not a 5-minute job, and it requires quite a lot of research. there is an excellent book on the website called Land Stories, and that is that's available on the website, and it's a great tool for you to be able to carry out your research. There are other areas or places that you can also find information regarding your property and the history of that property, and that includes the museum, our own archives, and also the local iwi will also be helpful. And we have to ensure that the land is not confiscated land because, or that the Methodist Church has come into that property, or and that's the sale of Land Story for selling is for buying and selling, but it's very important when you're selling to ensure that the Methodist Church has come into that building or purchased that building, and there isn't any history that means that they should not repeat it. So all approvals have to go through the parish first. It can't just be a Lone Ranger that decides that they want to sell or buy or purchase or to carry out construction. So the whole parish, the parish council needs to approve the project or the sale or purchase or a lease agreement, and then it needs to go to the synod and then to MCPC for approval. Well, I'll just mention quickly lease agreements, even though we're on the buying and selling of church properties at the moment, but there isn't another slide that's actually where it's appropriate. So the lease agreements that are over a 7-year term that require, over a 7-year term, and that's including the rights to renew, always will need an MCPC approval, and they want to ensure that the document is sound and that the agreement is legal. We usually ask parishes that are leasing properties to use the church lawyer who's been involved in many of our leases, and our church lawyer the Board of Administration is also asked that the church lawyer, who's Ed Loughnane at Hathley Loughnane in Christchurch, is involved in all sale and purchase agreement approval, and also the conveyancing for a property transaction. Each sale and purchase agreement, whether you're buying or selling, requires a Board of Administration signature, with the zoning and exceptions with Te Tahamari properties, and also the missions and some of the boards that have their own trust.
A lot of this process is around meeting due diligence, isn't it? That we've done due research on the properties, the sales, the history, and the approval process itself is due diligence, that it's sound strategically for parish and synod, isn't it?
That's right. And the thing is too these days with compliance, the requirements, and there are compliance requirements when you sell a property, and everything must be working. A really good example of that is the Maydale Street, where our office was, and we sold that property and moved out, but before we could actually hand over the property or settle, there was a few compliance issues that we had to get done. So the property was made into an office after the Christchurch earthquakes, and as you can imagine, the requirements of an office as opposed to a dwelling is completely different. So the electrical work hadn't been signed off. There was a hand basin that was put into the toilet that had not been there, because the hand basin was taken out of the bathroom so it could be Peter Van Hout's office. And there was also they rejigged the front door, the entry. So that had to be the hand basin proved to be the most interesting one, because they had to have drawings and a new galley track because it couldn't go into the existing one because the hand basin was being put back into the bathroom. So, and we were lucky to get the builder back who had carried out the work, who arranged for the electrician to come and sign off all the electrical work, and there were other things. So that's just an example of how things need to be when you're selling a property. And the other thing is to always make your property look as good as you can when you're selling it too. I'll just quickly touch on the 15% contribution for the development fund, and that is if you're selling a redundant property, 15% contribution needs to go to the development fund, and that's where the property development grants that helps fund those. That's where that money comes from, and that's part of the church law as well. And that is shared 50-50 ministry with ministry and with property. So mission resourcing responsible for 50% of those contributions. Now there is one other thing regarding the signatures for sale and purchase of properties, and that's along with that Board of Administration signature, we have to carry out all of the anti-money laundering requirements, and that means that a bit of due diligence from the connection office for that to ensure it's correct. So when you're building, one of the things that you want to think about is that a project manager is required for building work. If you were building a parsonage, it's likely you may be using a single builder or a construction company or cookie cutter builders, I guess you could say, that do this all the time. And they would have their own project manager, or they'll have their site supervisor. You need to think about an architect, and also if it's a heritage building that you're working on, you will have to use a heritage architect because they are up to speed with the requirements for heritage buildings. You'll need a quantity surveyor, and that's for obvious reasons, to ensure that you're going to meet your budget, and also the cost of the work. You'll need a fire consultant, a geotech engineer. You'll need your strategic plan because MCPC will want to know that you're building a property fits in or with the strategy for the parish, and that strategy fits in with the synod strategy. And in some cases you'll need to consult with local iwi, and that's usually for bigger projects.
That's part of your land story too, isn't it?
Yes, it is actually. Yeah. And that's a good way for that consultation to start as well, because you can start looking at the history of the area from the local iwi as well, or with their assistance. If you think about the building use, so think about what's going to be used for. Is it going to be used for a presbyter that's got an elderly parents? Is it going to, therefore, do you need wide halls? And that would, and think about the reduction of future maintenance. Disability access, is that required? So doorways and facilities, what is required? And heat pumps are placed for safe future maintenance. And then the design considerations for the building you might want to think about is separate ventilation for different areas. That's not necessary, or for separate areas, but that might be something you want to look at. And entries and exits, and all applications for building refurbishments to MCPC will require an asbestos management plan. So this is all of the things that you need to think about when you're at the consent stage. Sorry, the concept stage. The next stage is the consent. So you're lodging your consent, and if you've got a heritage building, you've got a heritage architect, you will find that that heritage architect has been liaising with Heritage New Zealand and the local council as well, because of the requirements by the council for the heritage building. And if that's the case, you may need an archaeological consultant, and that'll be part of your consent process. And not sure why invite tenders is in there. That's anyway. So that consent. So NCPC will need to approve the working drawings, and they will approve you being able to lodge a building consent. Once you receive the approved building consent, you can look at approving, inviting tenders, contractors to tender, and then once you have decided on the tender you would like to, or the builder that you would like to carry out the work, you would again apply to MCPC for that final approval to award the contract. And sometimes with a contract, it's actually a really good idea to get the church lawyer to have a look at the contract to make sure everything's there. And one of the things that you will need when you do award a contract is the contract works insurance. We'll just go to the last slide for me tonight. So you will require contract works insurance as the principal. If you give me a call or email me requesting that, I'll send out the proposal forms for you, and we can get that underway. Now, contract works insurance can take 2 to 3 weeks, even 4 weeks, because it's not a given that you're going to get it, and there's a lot of information that's required, including the contract, the plans, the final plans that have been approved, and the insurer will want to see that. Site health and safety hazards that under the Health and Safety at Work Act need to be included. Engineers work sign-off documents, PS 1 to 4, and also you need to ensure that the contractor has public liability insurance. You may need storage on site, so that's but when you start with that, this is all of the things that have to happen before you can start work. That's probably that's it, but and it's just a reminder for me, it is. Just a reminder about the importance of MCPC in the process, and also that Synod is involved early in any projects that you're wanting to undertake. I'll look at questions now. I'll
have a quick look now. There's one sitting in there. So Ian asked, should we involve the MCNZ lawyer in developing the lease between WCA and the Lower North Island Synod, or use a local Wellington lawyer, which the Synod has used previously?
Well, you should be using our lawyer because he's doing these all the time. But I also understand that the lawyer that you have used previously, that the Synod has used in the Lower North Island and Wellington area, is also in the same position. This was an instruction that came from the board, so I would suggest that the church lawyer is involved with the lease, drawing up the lease for Wellington Community Action and Lower North Island Synod. Thank you for your question, Ian.
Thank you, Wendy. So there's 2 aspects that we're looking at tonight around compliance. Wendy's talking about a lot of the requirements that are sitting in the bricks and mortar book, or the additions that have been added, like the new land story booklet that was approved at conference last year. And so that's about church law, how the church wants to do things. One of the first things I had to do when I joined with the church was to put the asbestos management policy through to conference once I got it through MCPC and the Board of Administration. So what I'm looking at is, how can a church entity ensure that it has met requirements. And the answer to that is different per entity. So what a parish might do will be different to what a mission may do, obviously, which will be different to what a campground or a preschool may do. At the base of what does compliance look like for the different entities is what are the number of properties that each of the entities is looking after will dictate the level of requirement that they need to go through. Are you a tenant or a landlord? Because the requirements are different between both of those activities. So while I talk about are we meeting our requirements, I'll also be trying to add in how it might look for the different entities through the church. Because, for example, Airedale Property Trust in Auckland also lease a lot of private residential buildings. If it's a residence, if I'm a tenant in a residence, I don't need to have an asbestos management plan. But when an Airedale Property staff member walks onto that site with a view of undertaking remedial work, for example, it becomes a workplace, and then it does need an asbestos management plan. So a lot of people may think it's a house, it's a private dwelling, I don't need a certain level of compliance, my requirements are quite low, but actually they change quite drastically depending on who you are within the equation. So I apologise for this. I don't normally talk about legislation. I just provide people with, here's a list of things that you should be doing. And I don't tell you where it's coming from with regards to what's the legislation that's driving these requirements. So I don't talk a lot about due diligence within the information that I provide, but due diligence is actually a foundation to much of the legislation that we have to follow. And I do talk about consulting, coordinating and cooperating, and that we're not builders, but we do hire contractors. It's our site. We should know the risks. Therefore, we should share our risks with the contractor and let them know what's wrong on site. In return, the contractor should be telling us what risks they're bringing onto site. And that's where your consultation and coordination, cooperation take place. One of the things that I'll be looking into this year, building warrant of fitness. What I do is I just send an email through to the councils, the district councils or the city councils, and say, here's a list of properties. Can you tell me if they have a building warrant of fitness within your system and if that system is up to date? So I started with Christchurch, and the funny thing was there was one building that did not have a current building warrant of fitness, and that was our building, 50 Langdons Road. That got fixed yesterday morning, wasn't it? So that was interesting. I thought if one building was going to be sorted, it'd be this one, but there you go. So just, it's a quick compliance check that we're meeting the requirements of the building warrant of fitness from the Building Act. In addition, asbestos management has been something that's been on my radar since I started, and that's due to the asbestos regulations. Approved evacuation schemes are something I don't think are highlighted enough throughout the church, so I'll be looking into those as well. What I've started again in Christchurch is talking to Fire and Emergency New Zealand and saying, hey, here's a list of buildings. What can you tell me about them? I'll go into that a little bit later. You may have heard me talking about emergency response plans, incident reporting, and identifying and managing hazards. Again, that comes out of the health and safety at work regulations. So it's not just me making up this stuff. So if you think I'm even making it up, it's not. There's things behind it. But I'm not going to win any friends by quoting legislation in anybody. So I just say, here's best practices, what we need to be doing. And I'd like people to be doing it. There's more specialised areas as well. As I said, we need to take into consideration all of the entities across the church. There's a hazardous substances regulation out there and it's designed around quantity. So if you've got large quantities of particular substances, you need to have a register of those substances. You need to be storing them safely. And even certain substances need to be notified through to WorkSafe. So they will give you a permit to store those on your site. The only places I can think of that perhaps this may apply to are our missions, if they've got large stores of cleaning products, or perhaps flammables. If they've got weed killer to any great degree, they may need to be aware of the hazardous substances regulations. When you're talking about domestic levels of cleaning products, if you've got a squirty bottle in your kitchen at your church hall, that's okay. Just make sure it's not easily accessible to kids and you're fine. Also, and I think this is somewhat relevant given the tragedy that's happened up in Northland with the latest flooding. My condolences to the family involved in that, because it's a terrible tragedy where the school child that was out on the school outing and they were in the caves or something like that got swept away in the flood water. When you're talking about adventure activities, which can occur at some of our church camps, those activities are actually regulated under the adventure activities, and that if it's an activity that needs instruction, it may be regulated, and therefore you need people who have the proper licenses, experience and training to undertake those activities. So as I said, there's other legislation for more specialised areas within the church, and that doesn't even touch on what's required through the education side of preschools and schools, or the boarding school at Wesley, and it certainly doesn't follow. I'm not going to cover off aged care or hospitals either, because they're a very regulated industry where they already have regular audits through ERO. I forget what that term means. The abbreviation is ERO. They do the audits at the schools, the regular reviews, and
I think it's Education Review Office.
There you go, ERO, Education Review Office. And aged care certainly has their own audits as well.
Actually, that's why we missed out on the building warrant fitness, was because we had an audit yesterday, but interestingly enough, it was because there was a change in the thinking of the person that inspected the fire, or the fire engineer that carried out the inspection, the fire inspector.
Yeah.
And what had been compliant from the start, and we've had it all along, they decided that it wouldn't need a smoke alarm there instead of a heat detector. So that was an interesting scenario.
Somebody changed the rules halfway through the game.
They did.
All right.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to take you through now is how I am looking at whether we're complying or not. So I've taken just a chunk of my register, the property register that I'm using, so that I can show you what I'm doing for various things. So I'll start with asbestos management. So to explain my register, first of all, in the left-hand column, I've got a risk ID. So every property has an ID number. It comes from the insurance register, and it is church requirement that every property is registered centrally through the Board of Administration and MCPC. So to me, that is our constant number from the insurance register. A brief description about the property and then the street address. Now, what I've done is I've gone through every valuation for every property, the latest valuation for every property, and they generally have a date on when the building was built. So when we're looking at it from the asbestos perspective, there's three key areas with regards to asbestos. Now, I'm not saying that asbestos is not present in the two outlying date periods. So the dates down the right-hand side are built before 1920, built during 1920 to 2001, and then built after 2001. It's just that in the 2 outside periods, the chances of asbestos are a whole lot less. So asbestos was brought into New Zealand in 1880 is when it actually started, but the chances of a building still existing from that period are quite small. Now, I chose to include in this particular screenshot one building that was built in 1900. And people would say to me, oh no, look, I don't need to worry about asbestos because we were built in the 1900s. But what you need to consider, and this is the very right-hand column that hopefully is on everybody's screens, is if it was built in 1900, you cannot say to me, and we have not done any modifications since then, because the chances of you still having a 1900s toilet or bathroom are so slim to be negligible. There's been updates done to every single building that was built in the pre-1920 period. So the modifications that have occurred in that time frame need to be considered as well. Unfortunately, for the post-2001, the government didn't legislate against importing any further asbestos-containing materials until 2018, I think. And we've found in Christchurch that there have been some asbestos materials imported after 2001, but nobody knew about them. The standard of reporting external to New Zealand is a whole lot lower, and they got away with saying in their country, no, we've got zero asbestos in this material, whereas in New Zealand we want to know about all asbestos, and it wasn't discovered till too late. So potentially, unless you've got a building that's built in the 2020s, in this current decade, you're still running the risk that it may contain asbestos. So you still need to take care, even if you're in the outlying areas. And so one of the ways to start showing that we're meeting our requirements of understanding our buildings is to actually record the date of your building. It's the very first step that I would take with any building. Further to understanding the dates of the buildings, I record when I receive the asbestos management plan. And then I'll write any comments against it if further work is needed. I've got a basic, is the asbestos managed or not? Is it in progress? And progress to me is that the parish understands there may be asbestos, but they're still wrapping their head around how to do it. But that level of awareness to me is key. And then I have a few properties that still need to be confirmed that people have really got their act together now. Some of the ones, I have not many that still need to be confirmed. Some of them I just haven't been able to get a hold of the right person, but I've managed to get great chunks of this removed now as well. So the asbestos management, I think the church is looking very good in this space. What I will be doing is I'll be expanding my level of understanding how well we're doing to actually recording it does have some asbestos, or it's confirmed that it's 100% clear of asbestos. So we'll be adding some extra categories into the asbestos management requirements. Against each property out on the right-hand side of the screen, I've also started contacting the local councils, as I said. So we have details of the building warrant of fitness number and the expiry dates against them. So for example, out at Opawa, their one is due at the end of this year. So obviously they renewed quite recently. Now, with building warrant of fitnesses, the council will always follow up because there's a dollar value associated with this for them. I'm not saying they're just chasing the dollars, but dollars is a very good way of triggering action if things haven't been happening. So with the building warrant of fitnesses, I'm not so concerned that people are not meeting requirements because I know council will follow up. But previously we had no record within the office that this requirement was being tracked centrally. So that's changing this year. One of the things, and this one here is a larger concern because it's not followed up in the same way. Our evacuation plans need to be approved by Fire and Emergency New Zealand, and there's certain criteria as to which ones fall into that category or not. So going through the darker blue columns on the right-hand side, if your building is capable of holding 100 people or more, and the key word to this is if the building is capable of it, not whether it does or not. If it's capable of holding more than 100 people, you need to have an approved evacuation plan from Fire and Emergency New Zealand. Additionally, if your building has more than 10 workers in it, it needs an approved plan. This next category, if your buildings sleep more than 6, and then it needs an approved plan unless there's less than 3 households in those numbers. Now, what that means is that if you have a church camp, then you will need an approved fire and emergency evacuation plan, because you've got more than 3 households being housed within that complex of buildings. So every single one of our camps will need an approved evacuation plan from Fire and Emergency New Zealand. I spoke previously about hazardous substances. Again, if you're storing them, you need an approved evacuation plan. If you're an early childhood centre or a medical centre, or you're looking after disabled people, you fall within that scheme as well, that you need an approved plan. So I've rated our buildings accordingly, and I'm just chasing up with Fire and Emergency New Zealand what records they have for these buildings that are answering yes. So I've got those back for Christchurch, and the results weren't that good actually. There were a lot of overdue plans. So once you've got your approved plan from Fire and Emergency New Zealand, it's a requirement that you keep that plan updated every 6 months by either holding an emergency drill, an evacuation drill, or your people are specifically trained in a 6-month period to manage an evacuation drill. So for example, if you're in a hospital, you're not going to be holding a drill where you evacuate the building, because sick people don't travel that well. Whereas if you trained your people every 6 months to understand how to evacuate people and who needs to be doing what, then that's the equivalent of holding your drill as you hold a training session. So just an example, if you want to go and look up your own building and find out the status of your building with Fire and Emergency New Zealand, if you've lodged all of your documents online by using a RealMe login, then you will have access to these sorts of results. These are the results for 50 Langdons Road. So you'll see on the left under my dashboard, the first plan was submitted on the 21st of January. It wasn't approved. That's because they come through and do a manual walkthrough with you. And the walkthrough was done about 7th of February, in which case the final documentation was sorted and it was approved. On the maintaining my approved evacuation scheme, that's have you had your 6-monthly evacuation drill or your 6-monthly training session? Our last one was held in February, so our next one is due in August. So we're all up to date with maintaining the evaluation plan there as well. So just a quick wrap up. Some of the places I verify that requirements are being met is the applications that go through to MCPC. I get copies of the asbestos management plans from those applications. I hear about hazards and issues by word of mouth if I happen to talk to somebody. If I visit a site, I will find things out, and it all gets recorded as to whether we're meeting requirements or whether more work is being done. So this year's task is, as I said, I'm going to all of the councils to ask them about building warrant of fitness. I'm sending lists through to Fire and Emergency to get their verification from that. And then I'll be emailing or phoning the various property people to say, hey, we need to get the approval on the emergency evacuation plans from Fire and Emergency back up to date. we also need to work out how we're going to manage some of the smaller parishes. That beautiful little old wooden church that only gets used once every 2 months, perhaps, because the parishes go into different places for their Sunday service. It will still need an approved evacuation plan. So we're going to work out how we're going to manage that when the building's actually not used that often. So we need to do a reality check about how much work we put into it, but we still have these requirements to be met, and that's what we'll be finding out today. So that's me. We've just got a few more questions come through that we'll go through now. James asked, the land story requirement is a significant undertaking for most parishes with mostly volunteers. Is there any thought of making this easier to do for parishes?
I'd love to be able to say yes, but no, there isn't. We encourage parishes to get onto their land stories long before they actually need them. It's a really good idea to do that. It is a requirement for the approval for MCPC. And Te Taha Mary Property Trust and also MCPC member Arapira Hotari has also advised that she would be available to assist. But there isn't any a way around it. The land stories are a requirement for selling a property especially, but also purchasing a property, and we would expect MCPC to be able to see those to make an approval, because some property in New Zealand was actually confiscated in it of the original owners, I suppose you could say. Yeah. So no, there isn't, and yes, I've certainly thought about it, but it isn't. There isn't any other way to research history. I would endorse though going to archives. Their email address is archives@methodist.org.nz. We have 2 part-time archivists there, but they do hold a wealth of knowledge. So and they understand the land story requirements, so they'll be able to help out. They probably won't write your final story, but they'll certainly provide considerable information if they've got it. And there isn't anyone in the connection office that is available to write those stories, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I'm not putting my hand up for that either.
I'm not either.
Right, we've got a question here. When does a property need to have a building warrant of fitness if it currently doesn't have one? A building warrant of fitness is about monitoring the emergency evacuation tools that a building has built into it. Now, if those are specific systems, so we're talking about a fire alarm system, you pull switch or you push button to say, hey, there's a fire, your evacuation path, if you've got automatic doors, they need to be built to a certain specified system compliance, and they go into a compliance schedule. So for example, our building has exit signs, fire doors, automatic opening doors. So when a fire alarm goes off, those doors are supposed to open and let you out. And that's why the council runs the system, because they're part of the building consent. So if your building doesn't currently have a building warrant of fitness, don't worry, you don't need one, because there's no electronic system or other evacuation systems that have been lodged with the council, and that's what they're following up on, is those specific systems that have been lodged with the council that they want to know that you're maintaining. So if you don't have a building warrant of fitness, don't worry about it, and if perhaps I think you should, I'll give you a phone call, but don't lose sleep if you don't have one. I've got another question here from John. Who is responsible for asbestos testing when an accepted damage insurance claim to interior ceilings is being advanced, i.e. the repair work by insurers contractors cannot be done unless suspected asbestos investigation is done and monitored during repairs and on completion. We've had a couple of situations of this. The insurer is responsible for testing the area that is damaged. And that's a due diligence requirement that the insurer cannot send in their contractor unless they know that it is a safe space for the contractor. However, if the damage is to a corner of a ceiling, not the entire ceiling, that's all that they're going to fix. They're not going to pay for the rest of the ceiling. So an example at Manurewa is the ceiling was damaged and they couldn't undergo any further repairs until the asbestos was removed from the ceiling. And the parish went to a lot of work to go, if we're going to go to this pain in this area, we should test the rest of our building, and they chose to remove all of the asbestos that they could identify at the time.
It's pretty much all of the ceilings in the whole church and hall. The other thing was the insurer was only going to encapsulate that asbestos, and the parish wasn't happy about that, so they said no.
Yeah,
we're going to remove it, and they did.
Yeah,
and
so encapsulation is where you put a false or another layer of jib, for example, on a ceiling and hide the asbestos. And what that does is it just delays the danger. The next person who puts a hole through that ceiling is going to encounter the asbestos, and it's dangerous. In Christchurch, after the quakes, the decision was made to remove the asbestos. That encapsulation is not the way to go. So the church requires the first option for asbestos is to remove it, not encapsulate it. So all asbestos removal happens first. You don't start work anywhere else until that asbestos has been dealt with. So with regards to your question about unsuspected asbestos investigation, you investigate first, you deal with it, and then you don't need to monitor it afterwards because the job is done and dusted. However, if during the works you do uncover more surfaces that weren't uncovered before, and there was another job in Auckland where they discovered that the windows had been inserted, that they were in place with asbestos material as an insulation packet around the outside of the windows, the job gets halted. You put a stop on the job until that asbestos is cleared out, and you were never going to find that asbestos until such stage as you uncovered all the surroundings around the windows. So asbestos can cause a stop-start progress through your job if you haven't been able to dig under all the top layers to find out what's underneath. From that perspective, the requirement is that your contractors understand asbestos and know what they're looking at when they uncover various substances throughout the job. Joshua asked a question. With recent extreme weather events, all the flooding, our church halls and buildings may become required for accommodating people, goods, etc. What is your advice for parishes that be looking to utilise their facilities during such emergency events?
In actual fact, we had a parish that did offer that in Napier, and what they were offering, because the weather was so severe, was a roof or a facility for homeless people, and also they provided food. So that they came to me and they asked, what do we do? And I went back to, I went to our liability broker, and I said, this is what they're planning to do. What do you want? What would you like from them for our liability cover? And the broker said, don't require anything at this for this, and because there's going to be church people will be present, and it was actually it was a volunteer that they had at the church that was involved with street people anyway, so it's just that there wasn't anywhere for them to go. And her comment was, well, good on them, that's awesome.
So that's from the insurance perspective. From the health and safety side, I would recommend that you've got suitable facilities, that you've planned ahead that should something bad happen, that you're going to open your doors to the community, that you've got safe facilities for people to use, that your toilet, your bathroom is suitable for the numbers that you might be getting, that you've got safe spaces for families to gather together, that if there's disabled people, that they've got easy access to get to the facilities or to and from the various areas within your church. And I feel for those people. I also feel for the people that were unable to assist in those situations. What I've done, because I was not in Christchurch for the quakes. I couldn't help with the quakes. That's why we moved to Christchurch, is to help with the earthquake repairs. And then I'm in Christchurch and it floods in the North Island, and we're down here and we can't do anything either. I've joined up with Civil Defence to find out what is it that we need to do. How can we as a church respond well in these situations? So if you think that your buildings may be used in such a way that you're going to be opening them up to accommodate people and goods, I'd actually recommend getting in touch with Civil Defence and seeing how you can coordinate to fit in with the whole program. You will, of course, have your immediate response. I know people need somewhere to come and stay with us, but if you can fit into the bigger picture of the whole Civil Defence response program, then you and your team within the parish will have that training behind you to respond to those emergency events as well. We've come to the end of this webinar. I'd like to thank everybody for your attention. Compliance is one of those things where you can switch people off quite dramatically, but if we're meeting our requirements, then actually we're operating very smoothly as well. So understanding the requirements and how to confirm that you're meeting requirements is quite an important task. And once we understand what we're doing a whole lot better, it all becomes a lot easier. So we are recording this webinar, and all relevant information will be made available on the website along with our presentation. And if you've got any further questions after this, then you can direct them to Wendy or myself. Our emails will be included with the information pack. And our next topic will be on Thursday, June the 8th at 5 o'clock. And we'll be talking about leases and tenancies. All other feedback and topics for our webinar program for this year will be gratefully received. So if we haven't covered off anything that you need, then please let us know. So thank you again for your time and interest in attending.
Thank you and good night.
Have a great night.